key shelf? Is everybody ready? All good? Are all of you ready? Thank you all for being here. This is our DAO Monday morning press conference, which we do nearly every week. And we do it for two primary purposes. And the first one is to review gun violence incidents in the prior week and some of the developments during that week. And it has been a very rough week. And the second is to talk about other things that are being done either inside the DA's office or outside the DA's office on related and important issues. This week we are excited to have the opportunity to talk about a couple of our successful prosecutions that have occurred very recently. Let me start by acknowledging some of the people who are here today. Mr. Listenby is not. We had a little last-minute bit of excitement, which happens in our office. We have with us Chesley Lightsey, who is the chief of our homicide and non-fatal shootings unit. As always, she is here to assist with any questions that you may have, both specific or not specific, involving cases. We have Erica Rebstock, who has not been here previously and is the chief of our major trials unit. She is the supervisor of the next two people I'm going to announce, and she has played an instrumental role in the high quality and success of major trials prosecutions during this administration. We have ADA Carolyn Jameson, who is an assistant DA with the major trials unit and successfully prosecuted one of the two cases that we're going to be talking about. And we have ADA Teresa Benavides Sexton, also in the major trials unit, also someone who has successfully prosecuted a majors case recently. We are here to talk to them and hear from them, but also to hear about both of these cases, which are past the point of conviction due to successful trials and are pre-sentencing. We also have with us Myra Maxwell, who is the director of the CARES program, which, as you know, is the Crisis Assistance, Response, and Engagement for Survivors unit, a unit that I am happy to say, in these unhappy times, has done a lot of good for people who have suffered the loss of a family member due to homicide. That success not only is evident from increased grant funding, but it's evident from the excitement that Reverend Maxwell has shown about possibilities of doing more not just for people who have lost a family member, but for people who have had a member of their family shot. I would also like to thank Reverend Maxwell for opening the doors of her church, the church where she is pastor, to allow us to use this house of faith for this presentation. And finally, we have Imam Kenneth Nuruddin, who is the resident imam at the Philadelphia Masjid and is here with us again for some thoughtful reflections on what is occurring. Let me turn first to the news about gun violence. We have had several weeks over the last 8 or 10 when we could report good news. This is not that week. The year-to-date homicides are 404. As of last year on this date, there were 341. This is an increase of 18% over last year. What we saw over the last several weeks was that the level of increase was coming down. It peaked at about 36%, and then it was coming down. And as early as last week, we were down to about 16%. But we're going back up. The increase is up to 18% as compared to last year, and obviously that's a tremendous concern to all of us. The number of homicides for the week September the 18th through September the 24th was 14. The number of non-fatal shootings was 33. If we compare that to what we have seen during the pandemic, there has for a long time been an average of about 1.5 homicides per day. That comes to about 10.5 per week. This is 14. So this is higher over the last week than the average that we have seen during the pandemic. During the week, there were also 254 gun, meaning gun possession, or gun violence incidents. Of those 254 incidents, 101 arrests were made by law enforcement, and so far we have 97 cases opened and charged by the DAO. I do want to point out a positive development, which is that in the last week, the Philadelphia Police Department made 16 arrests for homicides. Those arrests, of course, were not for cases that occurred during this last week. Those arrests were, in general, for cases where warrants had been issued in the past. But I definitely want to give credit to the detectives and personnel in the PPD's homicide unit for a job well done. That's a very high number of arrests that occurred for whatever reason. The usual number of arrests is more like 4, and we saw 16. Among the tragedies that we saw this weekend, and let's not kid ourselves, the situation now is causing Philadelphians to be frightened, to be scared, often scared for their own family members, scared for themselves. And that is completely understandable, because what we saw this weekend, and I'll go through this somewhat quickly, but we had a double shooting on Saturday, the 25th of September, around 9:30 p.m. on the 2300 block of Jackson Street in the 1st Police District. Victim 1 was a black male, about 35 years of age. He was shot 7 times in the upper body and was transported to Presbyterian Hospital, where he was placed into critical condition. Victim number 2 is a black male of about 28 years of age. He was shot 4 times in the body, also transported to Presbyterian Hospital, and he was later pronounced. No arrest has been made by the PPD at this time. Investigation is open. Anyone with information, please contact the PPD's homicide unit at 215-686-3334. Second shooting was a triple shooting homicide. On Sunday, September 26th, there was a triple shooting at about 10:30 p.m. on the 2700 block of North 26th Street in the 39th Police District. Victim number 1 was a black male about 39 years of age who was shot twice, once in the mouth, once in the chest. He was transported to Temple University Hospital, where he was later pronounced. Victim number 2 was a black male about 38 years of age, was shot 1 time in the right calf. He was transported to Temple University Hospital, where he was placed in stable condition. Victim number 3, a black male about 52 years of age, suffered a graze wound to the right arm. He was also transported to Temple, where he was placed in stable condition. No arrest has been made by the Philadelphia Police Department at this time. Anyone with information, please come forward, 215-686-3334. I would like to point out that in this shooting, there was a PAN worker, P-A-A-N, which is the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network. We are talking about a credible messenger. We're talking about someone who wears a jacket that says PAAN on it and goes to try to squash beefs, to try to find out what's going on, to get in the middle, to intervene, to stop it, to shut it down. This is the organization that is run in large part by George Mosey, who used to be a first assistant district attorney in the Philadelphia DA's office some years ago and had a long career in that office. One of Philadelphia's great assets, in my opinion, both he and his organization. One of the people shot was out there doing the work, wearing the jacket, when that person was shot. And the third shooting was a non-fatal shooting which occurred Monday, September 27th at about 2 a.m. in the 1300 block of Filbert Street in the 6th Police District. An approximately 26-year-old black male was shot once in the right leg and once in the stomach. The victim was transported to Jefferson Hospital and placed in stable condition. No arrest has been made by the Philadelphia Police Department at this time, and this remains an open investigation. Anyone with information, 215-686-3014. I'm speaking to a room full of journalists, reporters, people who operate cameras. I think you all know where 1300 Filbert Street is. That is an indication of what is happening in gun violence, let us just take a moment to be clear about what is happening. We do not at this point have a spike in crime. That's not the case. Crime is actually down. We do not at this point have a spike in violence. Violent crime is a category, which of course includes gunpoint robberies, stabbings, beatings, rape, in addition to gun violence. Violent crime is actually down as well. Both of these are down for 2 consecutive years. But what we are seeing is a terrible spike in gun violence both last year and this year. And that is what has us so rightly concerned. As of 11:59 p.m. last night, the city of Philadelphia had reached 404 homicides. Like everyone I know in Philadelphia, I am outraged by this. My executive team is outraged. Our staff is outraged, and we are all looking for partners, for collaborators, and for answers in community and in government. We are and have been looking to work together to solve this problem. If we talk about long-term solutions, there is no question in my mind of the importance of investment in communities, in the education of young people, in workforce development, in adequate housing, in trauma care. We did not get here overnight. The fact is that Philadelphia has been chronically high in gun violence for decades, for my entire career, which is now 33 years. We did not get here overnight. And we have done a very good job in Philadelphia for 33 years of not fixing the problem. So we have to invest heavily in prevention, not just with headlines, not just with talking about money that's put aside, but getting that money onto the streets. We have to do it, which is part of the reason that the DA's office has, in its own small way, taken $1 million of forfeiture money this year and so far distributed $704,000 to community-based organizations that can make a difference. But we also have to talk about short-term solutions. We have to stop the bloodshed in our streets. There are too many young men and sometimes young women walking the streets who are settling their disputes with gun violence. Well, in a moment, we're going to shift to the other topic. And that topic is what happens if you do get caught and if you do get charged in Philadelphia with being involved in gun violence and with inflicting serious harm on other people. There will be consequences if you decide to shoot someone coming from the DA's office. If you are caught, if you are arrested, you will be charged and you will be accountable. And that means all the way through trial and all the way through sentencing. We are better than this as a community. And as we work on the long-term solutions, we also have to work on the short-term solutions. And some of the time that means being really good at convicting people who do terrible violence to other people. The conviction rate for the DA's office for shootings and gun homicides before the pandemic largely shut down our courtrooms, and we'll talk about that, was close to 85%, which is unusually high nationally, unusually high locally. People who get caught are going to have a problem, and they are going to pay a price that is just for what they have done. I'd also like to point out that this last Saturday was the National Day of Remembrance for Homicide Victims. Internally and externally, this office, through CARES, through the work of our victim witness advocates, through the relentless work of our prosecutors to bring justice, we have found various different ways to honor and lift up the lives of victims, co-victims, survivors, and their families. And now I want to shift to talk a little bit about success. And that success, in this instance, is in 2 different cases. The Commonwealth versus Yusef Cross is one of them. The Commonwealth versus Pedro Diaz is another. I could tell you the details, but I won't, because I think it makes a lot more sense to have these very, very capable prosecutors who did such a great job with these cases come forth and give you the specifics themselves. Erica Rabstock, their supervisor, the chief of major trials, is quietly standing by. But make no mistake, she has had an integral role in the preparation of these cases and basically every other case that is handled by our major trials unit. You will notice as we talk about these cases that they were waiver trials. And what that means is they were not jury trials. Why? Because very, very few cases are getting resolved by jury trial in Philadelphia. I don't say that to point at anybody. That is how it has to be. There are other jurisdictions where they have not had any jury trials in 18 months or more. In Philadelphia, we have a trickle. We as a system tried to do about 4 jury trials a week because it is so much more difficult to do jury trials during a pandemic with issues of social distancing, juries having to sit together, etc. So what you're going to hear is that these important trials on these major cases were done as waiver trials, meaning a judge sat as judge and jury, rather than 12 residents of Philadelphia compiling that jury. The jury was the judge. That has been a very, very common system in Philadelphia for a long time. In many ways has been a very successful system. But I say that just so you understand why these cases, which were tried in front of 2 Philadelphia judges, were done as waiver trials. I'm going to call forward in order ADA Carolyn Jameson first, and then ADA Teresa Benavides Sexton. ADA Jameson will talk about the case she prosecuted, Commonwealth versus Yusef Cross, and for those of you writing down spellings, it's Y-U-S-E-P-H. And ADA Benavides Sexton will talk about the case she prosecuted, which is Commonwealth versus Pedro Diaz. Ms. Jameson.
Good morning. I handled a trial on September 17, 2021 in front of the Honorable Judge Perez, where the defendant, Mr. Cross, was found guilty of multiple charges, including first-degree felony aggravated assault, first-degree felony robbery, first-degree felony conspiracy, and a misdemeanor of the second degree impersonating a public servant, in which he did impersonate a police officer, for robbing and stabbing a man in his car in the city's Wharton section. This took place in October of 2020 at around 4 a.m. Both victims in this case had been asleep in their car when the defendant knocked on their window and pretended to be a police officer. He was in plain clothes. The defendant removed one of the victim's backpacks from the car. That victim got out of the car to ask for his bag back. This resulted in a struggle for the bag. During this struggle, a co-defendant held the victim down while the defendant, Mr. Cross, stabbed the complaining witness with a knife in the lower abdomen. The second victim got out of the car and attempted to assist his friend. The defendant, Mr. Cross, swung the knife at him as well, but thankfully did not make contact with that victim. Ultimately, police officers did arrive on the scene, and both defendants were arrested at the scene. Detectives from the South Detectives Division processed the crime scene. The complainant, who had been stabbed, was transported to Jefferson for emergency surgery and treatment for the serious injuries he sustained. He did have to have surgery on his bowel, which did need to be repaired. Thankfully, the victim has recovered from his injuries since this happened, but he did need follow-up care. This defendant is scheduled for a sentencing in December. The co-defendant's case is still pending at this time. This case did also involve the use of an interpreter at trial because both victims in this case were Spanish speakers.
If there are any questions about the cases, we'll address them at the end.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I handled a bench trial back on September 21st of 2020, where the defendant was found guilty of possession with intent to deliver, violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, Section 6105, knowing and intentional possession, and possession of an instrument of crime. Back in October of 2017, Philadelphia police officers and their canine partners responded to a location in the 25th District for a call of an escaped prisoner. At approximately 9:30 in the evening, the canine team began tracking the potential escaped suspect and were eventually led to a row home with an attached garage. During the course of searching for the escaped prisoner, Canine Officer Jojo began alerting to the presence of narcotics. Officers later executed several search warrants at the location and recovered from the second floor front apartment were the following items: a .38 caliber revolver, over $14,000, new and unused narcotics packaging, drug paraphernalia, 2 forms of ID in the name of the defendant, and over a pound of heroin laced with fentanyl. The defendant is scheduled for sentencing in November. Thank you.
Thank you to both of these excellent prosecutors and the supervisor for the wonderful job that they did with these cases. One more indication that when you bring all kinds of talent into an office and you find a way to let them work hard, they get it done. At this point, it's my honor to call forward Imam Kenneth Nuruddin, who is the resident Imam at the Philadelphia Masjid, for his comments, and then I will take questions for everyone, and I will have a few further comments. Imam?
Good morning, everyone. We all know how acute this problem is. And I'm here today as what you may call a third responder. We know when a shooting takes place, we have the response of law enforcement, we have the response of the medical, and we also have the response from the media. Secondarily, we have the second responders, and that is the family of the victim and the neighbors. Then we have those who have to respond, and I consider myself one of the third responders to an acute problem. And that is we have to come together and to try to not just offer some comfort, but also some long-term solutions. Because I did 6 funerals this week. Yesterday was the last one. 3 of them were homicides. And I also happened to be at Presbyterian Hospital Tuesday when the victim was brought in, and he was brought in dead on arrival. His family is there all distraught. Relatives come out vowing to take revenge. And the following day, the revenge took place. And this has been an ongoing feud that takes place, and it's a continuing episode. Now, here is what I want to say today. Again, the media is here. And whenever these incidents take place, the media focuses in on shell casings. If the body is there, they'll focus on the body, the blood, and the response of those who are in the vicinity. But if the media would pan back and show the whole environment, because these things don't happen in a vacuum. There are underlying conditions and there are circumstances that need to be brought into perspective, because to continue to just respond to acute problems without looking at the chronic conditions, we don't know how much it's going to tax us, because we have a change in the climate. We have a pandemic that is ongoing. And this change in the climate means that anything can happen at any time. And that climate is not just in the physical world, but it's also in the spiritual world. So the media gives a lot of attention to what is visual, to what is emotional, what shows impact. If the media would pan back after the shell casings have been removed and the blood has dried and the victim has been carried to the hospital. If we don't see what environment is conducive to these type of incidents, then we'll just continue reacting and not really addressing underlying conditions and problems. So again, as a third responder to acute problems, the community organizations, we have to be first responders to the chronic condition. And if we don't have a first responder team that is given the same attention that the media gives to acute problems, then we won't be able to address the issue. So again, the DA's office is illustrating its success in cases. The police arrests are up, but at the same time, the issues that we all have to face are still there. So let us again see not just first responders to acute problems, but first responders to the chronic conditions that exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam. Are there any questions?
Diaz, now you talked about a united front, and I know you said you've invited the commissioner, you've invited the mayor to these, but we hit 400, and we're not seeing that united front. We're not seeing you guys kind of come together. Do you think that's problematic? The community is not seeing the three top leaders in the city coming together to talk about this?
Well, I can tell you, this is what I think. So there is what happens in the public sphere. You're seeing a press conference today where partners are not here, but what you're not seeing is that last week, approximately last week, maybe it was the prior Friday, but within the last week, I have been in a room in a private conversation with police commissioner, with the new head of the FBI, with the head of the ATF, with the head of the current acting head of the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we were not only talking about matters of substance, we were talking about this. We're talking about the reality that there's a lot of good work that is going on, has been going on for a long time, but the public doesn't necessarily see it. And for that reason, I can tell you that I believe that there is a lot of support for making that collaboration, which is ongoing, more public. I can also tell you that in the last month, I've been in two separate conversations with our mayor, which is certainly a good thing, one in person and one by telephone, and that I'm looking forward to what I have wanted for a very long time, which is better and closer collaboration with the mayor as well. So in one sense, I agree with you. I do think it should be more public. I do think it should be more obvious, but I don't want people to misunderstand and to latch on to the, frankly, false notion that we are not in communication, that we are not working together. We are in communication and we are working together. And I would be delighted to have any and all of them come to the next Monday press conference that we schedule.
What came out of that meeting, though? I mean, if you're all working together, what is happening behind closed doors that we're not seeing?
Positive things, I can tell you that. Positive things.
Can you explain what those things are?
Nope, I cannot. That is part of how you bake the cake, by not telling everybody what you're baking.
Have those positive things been implemented yet?
Some of them are underway. Some of them are more aspirational. I can tell you that one of the things that is happening in this climate is thanks to the good work of some legislators and also, frankly, thanks to having a different administration in D.C., there are more grant opportunities for some of the efforts that we have needed for a long time. Make no mistake, the District Attorney's Office's budget is far too low, and it has been far too low for a few years. And that has to be remedied, because we are not going to be in a position to do all the additional things that we have been doing and to do all the additional things that need to be done unless we have adequate funding for the DA's office, but I expect that to happen. Even so, this is a yes-and situation. Yes, while we are fighting for the budget that we deserve and need, we are simultaneously seeking large grants. I have a meeting which comes right after this one, I consider this a meeting, where we're talking about $2 million in state grants, specifically to deal with different programming, new programming that will address violence. We have intentions, and by we, I mean people in the District Attorney's Office who have advocated for more than 2 years an improvement in forensics in Philadelphia, something that's been a chronic problem. We have some strategies and some plans around trying to get grant funding for something that inexplicably the city has not yet funded, right? So there are things that are underway. There were things that were underway. But, you know, it's actually quite simple from my perspective. My door is wide open. My arms are wide open. It's not just that we have been doing good collaborative work together when politics weren't getting into the press. It's not just that. I am entirely open to more and better collaborations with all the different partners who are serious about trying to do something about gun violence, as opposed to simply, how shall I put it, play a political song.
Is there any particular reason why this didn't happen a year ago when we almost hit 500 and now we're on pace to surpass last year's almost record-breaking number?
I say this to you respectfully, you're assuming something that's not true. The reality is that we have worked consistently and appropriately with people in the United States Attorney's Office from day one of our administration. We just weren't able to work with Bill McSwain, who spent his entire administration trying to do politics. The good news is he was busy doing politics, so we could get work done with everybody else in that office, some of whom I've known for 25 years, some of whose numbers have been on my cell phone for 20 years. We got a lot done, and the suggestion that we didn't was coming from a guy who, guess what, is now running for something as a Republican candidate and can't stop saying Trump because it makes him misty, okay? I mean, that's what really happened there. It is not true that we were ineffective in cooperating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We worked on the biggest drug case that I have ever seen in my entire career with the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's just something you couldn't hear about a year ago because the integrity and the morality of how you handle that prosecution is you don't make it political, but you will actually be hearing those details in the near future when it is all done. So, you know, I say that to you respectfully. I think this should have been more public and more openly public. I was open to that the entire time, and I remain open to that. But there was cooperation going on then, and there is now. You know, I have frequent communications with our police commissioner, not just with our monthly meeting, but texting back and forth, phone calls when it's necessary, and I enjoy them. I think we get a lot done. If I were to list for you the types of collaborations that are new, I'd go on for at least 5 or 6 different collaborations during this administration that did not exist before this administration. So I think we've done a lot, but I also think that there has been a failing on the part of all of leadership to get together and to do so in a public way, in a public space. And I'm hopeful that we can do that. Are there any other questions? All right, there being no further questions, I just want to make sure that you all understand, as we seek additional funding for relocation of victims and witnesses, and that you all understand, while I can't always talk about it, that when we are moving entire families across borders to protect them from what could happen to them, because they are assisting us with an important prosecution of a very violent person, I hope you understand that we care about victims, survivors, and co-victims. When I talk about the CARES program, and it's millions of dollars in grant funding for the first 3 years, Pastor Maxwell is in charge of our CARES program. I hope you understand that as we get new grant funding and we have meetings to talk about how we can provide even more services, so it's not just homicide victims, it's also to shooting victims. I hope you understand we do that because that is how you care for people and you care about people. You take those actions. And when I talk about 5+ new collaborations which exist between PPD and the DA's office in the last couple of years, some of them quite successful, to address gun violence, to address the quality of the investigations, the quality of the prosecutions, that is another way that you care for victims. But while that may not always be obvious to people, because it is happening behind the scenes, or because it is highly technical, because it's not the first thing that media is used to covering, honestly, it's real, and it's there. And the people standing behind me from the DA's office are every day a part of that deep caring for victims. Finally, I want to say my ultimate goal when it comes to victims is for there not to be any more victims. I cannot think of a higher calling for a prosecutor's office, traditional or progressive, than to say, what can we do to prevent the next murder by gun? What can we do to address the one that already happened in a way that makes sense? And if you look at what the philosophy of this administration has been from the very, very beginning, what we said even before we were in office, we said two things. We said, focus on the most serious crime, which gun violence is. And we have. And we also said reform the system. The focus on gun violence is the short-term solution. It's how we do everything we can in our lane to improve this situation. The criminal justice reform is the long-term solution. That's how you stop burning enormous quantities of money that could be in education, that could be in prevention, that could prevent the next killing and the next shooting. That is what we are about. It is what we have been about from the beginning, and we have not wavered in that. So I want to make sure you understand, victims, survivors, neighbors of people who have suffered a loss in their family or have suffered from a shooting. We care. We care deeply, and we are here to protect you. Thank you. Español? Can we do it in French instead?
Je ne parle pas français, je suis désolée.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
All I learned to say was, I don't speak French, I'm so sorry. And then ask something in English. That got me through Paris.
Still pretty good.
I can't, I'm weak. There you go. Oh, thank you, Paul. That's very good.
Do you want the mask on, or you don't care?